in clear defiance of Muammar Gaddafi's lead.
Welcome to the Middle East, the rest of the story. I am your host, Lindsey Williams, and I have with me today a guest, Rodney Valance. The standard currency of the world is crude oil. It is not the dollar, nor the yen, nor the pound, nor the won, nor the ruble. The Middle East right now is in crisis. What happens in the Middle East will affect every facet of our lives, from the grocery store to the airline ticket that you may want to travel on, to the value of the dollar and what it will purchase. $1.50 a gallon 3 years ago to $4 a gallon now. Gasoline still 4 quarts. Remember, it's not the gasoline that's changed. The gasoline is still 4 quarts per gallon. What has changed? The value of the currency that you're using to purchase that gallon of gasoline with has deteriorated to the point that it is there. There are in the world today 3 agendas that we need to consider in the course of this presentation. 3 things that are controlling the world. Now, may I state emphatically, if I can at this point, this positively is not a conspiracy. This is an agenda. Note the difference between the 2 words. The first agenda is the New World Order.
Of its founders.
We have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
The New World Order. Secondly, let's go to the agenda of the Muslim world. This would be jihad. And then thirdly, we have the agenda of Jehovah, the true and living God. The Bible is the agenda. And today we're facing all of 3 of these, and we try to divide between the 2. Which one of these 3 will ultimately prevail? I think it'll be quite obvious before we finish this DV what it is. This is what the Middle East, the rest of the story, is all about. I have the privilege of having with me today Rodney Valance. Rodney, welcome.
Thank you, Pastor. It's an honor to be here with you. I just can't tell you how excited I am to be able to share the global information that you're bringing to the viewers of this message and couple it with personal finance and how it impacts us here in America from a personal level.
Well, give me some of your background, Rodney, and why does the audience need the material that you'll be giving today?
Well, I've been fortunate enough to be in the financial services business for the last 2 decades, where I've helped people from all walks of life, everywhere from multimillionaires turning their money into more, and people who were so buried in debt they didn't know where next week's groceries were going to come from. So I've got a good understanding of where most of America is today. And where most of America is, that they don't have the inside knowledge or the opportunity to have the information that you bring to the table and how to use that to form their future decisions about their financial tools and implementation. So as a professor teaching personal finance at Mid-Atlantic Christian University in North Carolina, the author of several books, including The Love of Money, How to Build Wealth and Not Be Corrupted, and a financial expert for CBN television, I've got a very good idea and understanding of what people need, how they need it presented, and the best way to help them understand how what you're sharing with them merges with what they need to know to protect their families.
Rodney, I understand you're a talk show host.
I do, yes, that's right. I've got my own nationally syndicated radio program as well. That's how we met. I invited you on our show after many listeners had requested that I invite you, and that's how we came about. Instead, I had the perfect face for radio. We'll see how that turns out on video.
Well, Rodney, I was told many months ago that within 4 to 5 months there was going to be a crisis in the Middle East. Everyone is expected it to start with Iran. I happened to be on your talk show at the time and said within 4 to 5 months. Now, people look at me and they say, well, Lindsey Williams, you're a prophet. And I say, no, I'm not. It is because of who I know that I was able to say this. And I appeared on your show and said, Rodney, in 4 to 5 months, there is going to be a crisis in the Middle East. I'd like you to confirm that.
You absolutely did, but you shared more than that. Well, off the air, you shared more than that very day. You also told me that in the short term, silver was going to take a little bit of a dip in the beginning of February, and by the end of February 2011, that silver was going to be exponentially much more valuable. And to the day, you were exactly right. In fact, I made some personal investments based on that information, and I saw a 20% increase in my silver investments in that 30-day period.
I went on radio shows all across America, and I said within 4 to 5 months' time, I have been told by the people who give me information that there will be a crisis in the Middle East. Now, Rodney, I understand that you have some information that came from documents from the federal government that there would possibly be a crisis?
Yes. Actually, in 2008, a U.S. State Department diplomat, he had papers, memos that were confiscated in the Cairo airport. A London newspaper, The Telegraph, got a hold of these documents. In these documents, Pastor, it clearly stated, and they gave the months and the days, and this State Department employee was working with government organizations, labor unions, as well as U.S. government, not the Egyptian government, but U.S. government organizations, the Muslim Brotherhood, the labor unions, as well as other youth organizations, to cause an uprising. What they were hoping for, according to this document, was to create an uprising that would eliminate the current regime under Mr. Mubarak before the presidential elections, the Egyptian presidential elections before their elections in 2009. The memo also says that they realized the time frame was too short and they were going to strive do it before the presidential election of 2011, which is in September of 2011. So all of these plans were laid out in a government memo in 2008 for the Egyptian government to be overthrown, the President Mubarak to be overthrown before the Egyptian presidential election in September 2011. And it is well documented. You can go to the London newspaper called The Telegraph, and you can see the actual documents.
So all of this was planned well in advance. They knew it was going to take place. What is taking place in the Middle East today was no surprise whatsoever. To my informants, I was told that it was going to take place in 4 to 5 months. I asked them at the time, because Iran was such a crisis point, and I asked them at the time, I said, is this going to be an Iranian crisis? They wouldn't respond to me. Mm-hmm. I said, where is it going to be? They wouldn't tell me where. Mm-hmm. I did not know where it was going to take place. I merely knew it was going to take place. So that means then that the powers that be brought this on in the Egyptian riots. Now, let me go back a ways. In 2008, I was told by my informants that there was going to be a major shift in the price of crude oil. In fact, they said the price of crude oil is going from $147 a barrel to $50 a barrel, and they said it'll take place within 3 months from now. I went on major radio talk shows all across America, and I risked my reputation and said there is going to be a change in the price of crude oil from $147 a barrel to $50 a barrel. People laughed at me. They thought I was crazy. In fact, I had one radio talk show host that actually laughed at me over the radio. And then another time, I had a Wall Street analyst that happened to be on a program with me, and he said, "Chaplain, you shouldn't say this." He said, "This is going to impact," he said, "this would impact the world in such a way that it would be catastrophic." Well, it not only went to $50 a barrel, it went to $43 a barrel, and it went to $1.50 a gallon at the gas pump. And at the same time, I was told by my informants that it would be 2.5 years before the price of gasoline and the price of crude oil would go back up again. Now, folks, you can go back and see this. It was archived in many radio talk shows across America. It was not hidden. I said it in my own DVDs back in those days before it ever happened, and it took place exactly as they said it. So they knew in advance what they were going to do. And they said it'll stay there at that price, $50 to $70 a barrel, for this 2.5 year period. Then, at the end of the 2.5 years, they came back and said to me, "Chaplain, the price of crude oil is going back up again." And I, just a few months ago, said, "Folks, get ready. You're going up to $150 to $200 a barrel on crude oil." And exactly as my informants had told me, it began to happen. Now, what does this mean? At this point, people called to me and said, "Lindsey Williams, you're a prophet." And my response to them is, I am not a prophet. I'm just an ordinary everyday guy that puts on his britches just like anybody else does on any given day. But it just so happens that I know the people who are doing it. Now, what does this mean basically to the person out there in the listening audience? Let me go back a ways and try to explain it if I can. 35 years ago, I had a very unusual experience. It was 1970 that I went to Alaska as an aviation missionary. I had only been in the state for a short time, and I heard they were going to build the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline.
Alaska, a land of inspiration, where mountains reach toward the sky and rivers meander aimlessly to lose themselves in the sea. The Trans-Alaska Pipeline begins at Prudhoe Bay on the Arctic coast and moves south along a narrow route. Its 800-mile journey takes it through land that is sometimes a better home to the grizzly bear than to man. It passes through remote places with lonesome-sounding names, like Coldfoot, Toolik, Old Man, Sheep Creek, and Chandalar. It crosses flat deserts and high mountains, where temperatures range from 80 below in winter to 100 above in summer. 800 miles from where it began, the pipeline ends on the south-central coast of Alaska at the ice-free port of Valdez on Prince William Sound.
And that approximately 50,000 men would converge on the state to build that 800-mile, 4-foot diameter pipeline. The first thing that came to my mind as a missionary was 50,000 of the roughest, toughest, cussingest, drinkingest, orneriest folks on the face of the earth. They must need some spiritual guidance. So I went to Alaska Pipeline Service Company the consortium of 9 major oil companies that were going to build that pipeline. And I said, don't you need a chaplain on the pipeline? They laughed at me at first. They said, we never had a chaplain on any pipeline in the world. I kept going back and back and back. I guess persistence paid off, and finally they said, okay, we'll give you the northern 7 camps, beginning at Prudhoe Bay, where the big oil field is on the Arctic Ocean, down to Galbraith Lake. Just go up there and see what you can do. I did. I'm sure they thought I wouldn't last very long, but 6 months later I was still there. And they came to me and said, Chaplain, you're saving us thousands of dollars of counseling fees that we're not having to pay. We never had a chaplain on a pipeline before. We didn't know your value. We would like to offer you executive status. Now, this could only have happened by the providence of God. There is no way that a little insignificant, unknown missionary out in the bush of Alaska could have ever lived with the elite of the world. For 3 years' time, I was invited into their board meetings. They said, Chaplain, we'd like you to sit into the board meetings in order to help the relationship between management and labor. I lived with the people you hear about in the World Bank, the IMF, the top oil company officials of the world. It changed my life, because if someone had asked me before I went to the pipeline and lived with these people and stayed in the dorm with them, sat across the dinner table from them, and talked with them, not in my church, but on their oil field, if someone had said to me, Chaplain Williams, do you believe there's a group of people on the face of the earth who control the world? I would have laughed at them and said, who are you, a John Bircher? If someone had asked me after my 3 years of experience, Chaplain, do you believe there's a group of people on the face of the earth who tell the president what to do, who dictate to Congress what bills to pass, who control oil prices and the world and currencies? I would have said, not only do I believe it, but I sat and listened to them talk about it. May I state emphatically, I hope that you'll believe me as a person who has been a minister of the gospel for 50 years. There positively is, on the face of this earth, a group of people who control the world. They tell Congress what bills to pass. They tell the president what to do. And on any given day, our lives are affected by these people. Many of them have to do with crude oil. Now, in the course of this DVD, I'm going to make some very unusual forecasts. These people have told me things, and I'm going to be talking about and showing you what will happen in the Middle East, what you're going to be paying for a gallon of gasoline in the future, what's going to happen at the grocery store just around the corner. I'm going to tell you where gold prices are going. They have already told me, and they have a timeline. Their timeline, by the way, is 2012, and they intend to do what they're going to do with the new world order. By the end of 2012, there are some very definite things that they plan to do. This group of people positively do exist in the world today. And 35 years ago, when I had the privilege of meeting with them, I made friends with some of them. And some of these individuals have kept in touch with me over the years, 2 of them in particular. And as a result, every time they have told me something, it has happened exactly as they said it. Never one time has it been any different. We need to know what happened back then in order to bring up to date. So if I may, I'm sure you're wondering what the rest of the story is. And Rodney, when we look at what has taken place in the past, as a financial advisor, what would you say to your people? How do you plan for the future?
Well, I always tell people, well, one thing for sure is, I always have to tell them, past performance is no guarantee of future returns. That's the law that is set by the SEC and FINRA that I have to always say anytime we're talking about any investments. Now, when I talk about history repeating itself in a general sense, I have to let people know that one thing is constant, one thing is always happening, is that companies, corporations, and governments don't plan the way you and I do as individuals. Many individuals today, they think of long-term planning as what next week's grocery list is going to be. They don't think about long-term planning being 10 years, 20 years, 30 or 40 years. That's impossible to comprehend from most people's point of view today. But I would like you to think about, as as Pastor Williams, you're about to share with us a timeline and historical proof of some things that occurred about 30, 35 years ago, I'd like for people to think about the fact that a gentleman named Ted Benna was hired by a large banking organization in 1980 to find a way for them to get out of the pension business. This banking organization understood that come 2010, 2011, and beyond, baby boomers were going to be retiring, and it would bankrupt them if they had to pay pensions for all these employees. So back then they tried to find a way so that they would not have to be on the hook, so to speak, for lifetime incomes for their employees. At the same time, the U.S. Congress and the Internal Revenue Service were looking for ways to shore up potential revenue deficits that were projected at the same time that these baby boomers would start retiring, 2010, 2011, and beyond. So when Ted Benna, this gentleman that was hired by this bank, found the little known blurb in the IRS code under section 401, subsection K, he found that that was an opportunity for people to put money aside for their own retirement in a pre-tax method, coming out of their paychecks before they pay taxes on it, and let that money grow in a tax-deferred method so that years down the road they could retire and be taxed on the money then when they pulled it out. This was perfect for what the Congress and the IRS needed. It was perfect for what businesses across the country needed, because it got them off the hook, so to speak, for having to pay these large pensions for lifetime incomes.
So you're saying the demise of the financial system today was known and planned way back in those days, as my informants have told me it was?
Well, what I'm saying is that they planned well ahead, 30 plus years ahead, to prevent the short revenue shortfalls. Now, understanding this is how businesses plan 30 and 40 years out, that helps you also understand why we have 30-year treasury notes. Why would we have that if we didn't plan that far out? Who would take debt for 30 years? Who would buy debt for 30 years? And these 30-year notes. And so what I'm trying to do is just help people understand from a personal perspective, from people who our long-term planning is what we're going to do on summer vacation at the longest, or what the grocery list is going to be for next week. Help us understand that it's not unreasonable to believe that organizations and governments plan so far ahead as what you're about to tell us.
Well, let me begin where it began. Bring you up to date with a brief history lesson so that we can comprehend the startling facts that we're going to give as we continue through this DVD. Really, I need to go back to 1901. 1901 in Beaumont, Texas. Some of you may remember something called Spindletop. That was the time at which the first gusher came in of crude oil. And at that time, because of it, 4 major oil companies had their beginning. Texaco, Shell, Standard Oil, Chevron. The majors had their beginning at that point. Now, 1903, Henry Ford produced his first assembly line automobile. This began the great energy crisis rush and crude oil usage that we have in the world today. And in Germany, Mercedes produced their first assembly line, Mercedes automobile. American gasoline back in those days was 15 to 25 cents per gallon. Oil at that same time, or shortly after that, had been discovered in the Middle East. And all of a sudden, the major oil companies, who now had become quite wealthy, such as Texaco, Shell, Standard, and Chevron, they said, all right, there's oil in the Middle East. The Arabs had no way of producing it. They did not have the funds with which to produce their own oil fields. So our major oil companies literally divided up the oil-producing countries where they knew the oil was, as it was going to be produced in the future. They divided up those countries amongst themselves. For instance, there was a gentleman by the name of Mr. Ken Fromm, whom I knew very well when I lived with these people years ago. And he was given the job by Atlantic Richfield to actually go to the United Arab Emirates, Dubai, and that part of the world and physically build their oil fields from nothing. They knew the oil was there. And our oil companies said, we will build your oil fields. You don't have the funds to do it, and you pay us back after you are producing this oil, and in turn, we will not produce from our own oil fields. This is so significant. Americans have always wondered, why can't we bring in our own oil, have it cheap? Why must we be obligated to the world? There's a reason for this. And it was back in the days when Mr. Henry Kissinger was the Secretary of State. He went abroad to these parts of the world, in the Middle East now, and said, all right, your oil fields have been built. You've paid the oil companies back for what they did in building those oil fields. He said, I would like to cut you a deal. And the deal basically was, we will buy your oil. You in turn take a portion of what we pay you for that oil with and invest in our Federal Reserve notes, our T-bills, our treasuries. Folks, even back then, they knew what was going to take place in 2012, and they knew that the condition of the dollar, even back in those days, it was all planned way back 50, 60 years ago, because he knew someone had to buy America's debt. Let me try to explain this. The T-bills, the issues of the Federal Reserve, they pay the interest, and foreign countries buy it. China has approximately $1 trillion of American paper. And the Middle East oil producers, they in turn bought it. After all, it was as sound as the dollar. That paper was the most sound paper there was on the face of the earth. And they knew that this could take care of them for many years to come. At least they thought, because that America just couldn't go bankrupt. So they trusted our paper and they bought it. They bought literally trillions of dollars worth of it. So what happened? Here they sit now with our Federal Reserve paper, literally trillions of dollars worth of it, and at this point, we come down to today. Every bit of it was a part, someone had to buy what the powers and the elite of the world knew would be our future indebtedness in the United States of America, and they bought the interest on the debt. This was about the same time, I believe, Rodney, the 401ks came into being, and all of this fit together in them knowing good and well that there would come a time when here in this country we were going to have a major problem financially.
Right. And if you remember now, 401ks particularly are when you put your money into your retirement account before taxes are taken out. It grows without any taxation every year. When are you taxed on that money? It's when you pull it out. So as you were withdrawing that money, when the baby boomers hit, the largest workforce that the country's ever known, when we start to retire and we start to draw money out of our 401ks and our IRAs, we pay higher taxes on that money to the government than we would have paid in the early days when we had tax deductions such as mortgages and children at home and the tax rate was lower. So this was a well-devised, well-planned out thought of retirement planning to benefit the government, because the IRS's theory is pay me a little bit now out of your paycheck or pay me a whole lot more later. So yes, they knew there was going to be shortfalls after the turn of the century, after the 2010 mark particularly.
Now, when Mr. Kissinger went abroad and cut that deal with the oil-producing countries of the world, he knew exactly what was going to take place. He foresaw, and all of this planned in advance. I remember one day I was sitting down with one of these individuals at Prudhoe Bay, and we sat for hours as he explained this to me. Now, when Mr. Kissinger went abroad to cut that deal, you buy our treasury notes with a certain portion of what we buy your oil. We will not produce our own American oil fields. There were two nations that would not sign on with Mr. Kissinger. One was Iraq. This is the reason for the Iraq War. Saddam would not agree. He would not go along. The second one was Iran. And you'll remember about that same time, the Iranian crisis took place and the Shah was deposed. Every bit of this was because they would not sign on to Mr. Henry Kissinger's deal that he had gone over to pose to them. And why did we have this? Well, you remember after that, that in Iraq, that Saddam actually threatened Daddy Bush, Senior, the Bush of many years ago, and he threatened him and said, we're going to take your life. This started the whole thing. And the Iraqi war was nothing but an oil war. It's sad to think that these people care so little of humanity. Then we come down to Iran and what's happened there. Now, there are many countries in the world that have the bomb. Why pick on Iran all the time? It's because it was Iran that would not sign on back in those days with Mr. Henry Kissinger, and because of that, we pick on them all the time. It's a part of the whole plan of the New World Order. Now, let's come down to China. You'll remember that Bush Senior, Daddy Bush, was an ambassador from the United States of America at one time to China. China prior to that was a closed society. The Great Wall literally separated China from all the rest of the world. At the time that Daddy Bush went to China as the ambassador years ago, it was the time at which China was brought out of its position of a closed society, and at that time the elite of the world planned what we're seeing today. every bit of this is a part. Again, I go back, this is not a conspiracy. I do not believe in a conspiracy theory. I'm not a conspiratorialist. This is an agenda to make China what it would be, to bring America to the place where we are today, to have these Middle East oil company producers, which later became OPEC, to have all of this fit into the pot of the New World Order, which they would have later. Now, China, in turn, became, as I was told recently, one of these individuals said to me, he said, China is the big one. He said, never mind what happens in North and South Korea. He said, don't worry about what's taking place in the Middle East. He said, the thing you want to keep your eyes on is China. Now, recently, China made an agreement with Russia. As of last year, Russia became the #1 producer of crude oil on the face of the earth. Prior to that time, it had been Saudi Arabia. Russia bypassed them on last year. Why? Because of their super deep wells that they drilled many years ago and found massive amounts of crude oil. So last year, Russia made an agreement with China. China said, we will buy our crude oil and our natural gas from you. China and Russia said, we'll sell it to you. Do you realize what this is doing? This means then at some point when all right, we'll get into the Middle East in a moment, but you see the building of China, the moving of American industry abroad, the taking away of our jobs in this country, and it was planned and was in the works all the way back in the days when the Middle East agreement was made.
One important note there, Pastor, is that when China and Russia made this agreement, they both agreed that they would not use the world reserve currency, which is the US dollar, to trade in. They agreed to use their currencies instead of the US dollar. That's a very important and significant note, because China also has trade agreements with the country of Turkey in the same way. They agreed in 2010 to no longer use the US dollar as their reserve currency when they trade back and forth. So when China buys their mass quantities of oil from Russia, they're buying it in the yuan, which is the Chinese currency.
Do you have the slightest idea what Rodney has just said as to how this begins to form the removing of the American dollar, the greenback, as the reserve currency of the world? And again, I stress the fact that as we go on through this, you'll see how it fits into a perfect pattern of what the elite have wanted to do with their new world order. Yes, you're correct. Russia said, China, we will use some other currency beside the American dollar. This is the first time this had ever happened in the history of crude oil, because always the dollar had been used as a reserve currency for the sale and trade of crude oil all over the world. And now, for the first time, our industry has been moved to China. Our jobs have been moved to China. Our dollar now is not the reserve currency of the world. Well, we might say it is, but yet on the other hand, it's beginning to wane very quickly. Every bit of this fits into the total plan of the new world order.
And if people will take a look at their investment strategies, whether it be in their 401k, their IRAs, their mutual funds, whatever they're investing in, and I don't mean to pick on 401ks, but if you will look at one specific area that we've been investing in for years, decades, is emerging markets. People don't understand what emerging markets mean. Emerging markets are the countries that are emerging as significant trading partners in the world, such as India, Pakistan, and countries such as that, in China. And when we are investing in emerging markets out of our retirement account at work, what we're in essence doing is we're replacing our jobs. We're paying other countries to develop a middle class that is actually and documented to be replacing the middle class of America. As these middle class and purchasing groups are being developed in foreign countries to trade with countries such as China, we're replacing the importance and the value of American buyers, American companies, and the American currency.